Hi, my name's Sarah, and this is Discover Hope, Stories of Spoken Hope, when the script of your life gets flipped. This space was created out of my experience of losing my late husband, Sheldon Koch. And today, what I wanted to share with you was his life. Because when I was processing through all of this, which by the way, none of this is scripted. I've known I needed to wait from the beginning. It wasn't like I was going to do it from the beginning, but actually in October of 2018, almost 9 months after Sheldon had passed, is when all this idea and kind of desire, I guess, came to me. But until now, actually recording and creating this, it's like I knew him. So many knew him and loved him, but yet maybe some of you will find this space and be like, well, who was he? And what was he like? And what was he about? And how did you guys get together? And you have kids. What are their names and all of that? And so I'm the type of person that if I get into something or find a podcast or anything like that, and it's like I want to deep dive and be like, know all about him. And so I thought maybe I'd make this part a little bit easier for you and to get to share with you the life of Sheldon Koch. Sheldon was raised in Ferndale, California, which he always liked to say is the furthest western city in the continental U.S. It's in Humboldt County, California. And if you know, you know. And I grew up in Olympia, Washington. Tenino proper, but that's a story for another day. And this is so crazy. Life is so crazy. So ultimately, Sheldon and I ended up meeting in our young 20s down at college. It's called Life Pacific College in San Dimas, California. And Sheldon ended up coming over, came with a friend. A bunch of us were hanging out at my apartment, and my friend Dave Winfrey brought a friend of his, Sheldon, who had just gotten to school, even though it was like Christmas, going into that winter semester or whatever. And so, you know how you are when you're hanging out with different people, you start chatting and different things. And then before I knew it, Sheldon and I ended up in our kitchen. And unbeknownst to me, he had been working at Sears, which is like an appliance store, amongst other things, while he was going to college at the Redwoods. He played football there. And, when you're like starting to flirt and it's like, these are only the things you would say at the beginning of flirting. Out of nowhere, he looks at me and he looks at our stove that was in the apartment and he says, I bet you I can tell you how big your stove is. And I was like, no way, really? And that's where we started talking. And that was in January of 1999. And we talked, or I should say I talked his ear off until February 24th of 2018. The thing that was so magnetic about Sheldon is, so it was, spoiler alert, Sheldon was going to school to be a pastor. At that time in like the church world, it seems like it was like kind of this era where faith seemed to have just be really strict and just kind of have these big harsh lines. And so, but I wasn't like that. And that did not align with me. But yet anyway, that was the era that it was. What was so striking to me about Sheldon is, first of all, he just had this happy-go-lucky way about him. And those that had the privilege of knowing him, you know what I'm talking about. He just had that way. And back then, a lot of people were reading like this old time author named A.W. Tozer. He was a theologian and very deep and very concrete and very like thunder in the mountains. And I'll never forget, Sheldon was sitting in the hallway because we didn't have cell phones yet like we do now. Well, I mean, we did, but we had Snake. That was like the one game. So anyway, he was sitting in the hallway waiting for his class and he was reading a book. Imagine that. And I was like, oh, what book are you reading? And it was a book by Max Lucado. And that's another spiritual author. And I would say it this way. If A.W. Tozer was more like thunder in the mountains, Max Lucado was more like a shepherd amongst the sheep. And it was striking to me because I was like, wait, this guy's different. Like I already knew he was different. But it was like, wait, and Sheldon was just different. He was always ahead of his time. I always like to say, like, he was listening to Coldplay before Coldplay hit the US. He could pick up on styles and trends before they hit. Like, he was beautifully unique and very true to himself. And so we ended up getting married on July 15th of 2000, and we lived in Laverne, California. And I had actually graduated that May, and Sheldon was 2 years younger than me and was still continuing his schooling. So there we set up camp, and very quickly, Sheldon was actually offered a job at a church here in Washington State where he got to live out his like dream of being a vocational pastor. At the time, he was a youth pastor. And so we moved to Puyallup, Washington, and it was there that we had our first son, Scout, who is now 21 at the time of this recording. And then we spent some time there, and then we ended up moving to Sacramento, actually Roseville, California, where we then had our second born son, Rocco, who's 20, and our daughter, our one and only daughter, Ruby Love, who now is 17 and will be 18 next month, which I cannot believe that. So pause there. When Sheldon was a youth pastor in Puyallup, he was asked by like a nonprofit organization to come do a talk out at a school in University Place. And this was like in 2001. So it's like it's crazy to think it's 2025 and how much life has changed in the last 25 years as far as like Google and the internet and just different things. So Sheldon came out to University Place, did his talk at this school, and he ends up calling me, and he was like, hey, babe. I was like, hey, what's going on? And this was just like him. He's like, hey, I don't even know what city I'm in, but I swear to you, we're going to have a church here one day. And back in 2001, like church planting and all that stuff, that wasn't like on trend. So I honestly was like, what? And he's like, no, I think we're going to have a church here one day in this town I'm in. And I was like, oh, okay. Swear to God, I'm not super proud of this. But I literally was like, okay, babe, Oprah's on. Can we talk about this later? And just like his fashion, he's like, okay, see you at home. So that something definitely got deposited into him that day. And you want to know what's crazy? Our youngest son, who I'll get to later, is finishing up 7th grade at that school. And all 4 of our kids have gone to school there. They've all graduated from the University Place School District. So go to California. Ruby Levin Rocco, he's a youth pastor there, started an internship, blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, when our daughter was born, and I am talking in the hospital, he comes to me and he says, babe, I think it's time to go. And I'm like, home? And he's like, no, I think we need to get to Washington. I think we need to plant that church. And I definitely am rooted in the Christian tradition and have no apologies for my relationship with God and love for God. Yet, I don't think neither Sheldon or I understood what we were saying yes to when he was choosing a life of vocational, like he wanted to be a pastor. And I truly, truly believe 3 things in my life. I believe Sheldon was meant to be my husband. I believe with all my heart he was meant to be the father of our kids. And I believe with all my heart that Sheldon was created to carry a message of hope and love and peace. And one of his most amazing things about him is if you had a dream, he was the guy that was going to do everything in his power to see that dream come true in you and through you, even if it meant at the cost of his own dream. He was very, very selfless that way. So anyway, all this to say, Ruby Love was born on June 18th of 2018. And long story short, we literally had packed up our belongings. He did not have a job. We didn't even have a guaranteed place to live. I do not know what we were thinking. We packed up a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an 8-week-old, and we headed out for Washington State 8 weeks after Ruby Love was born with like all of our things in a U-Haul. Him and the boys were in the U-Haul. Ruby Love and I were in the Suburban, and honestly, we would always say, remember when we felt like rock stars until we got to Portland and it dawned on us? We didn't have jobs. We didn't even know where we were living. And yeah, and I still can't believe that my parents didn't. Well, that's more on that later, but that's who my parents are. They were like, you can do anything. You guys got this. And we did. We figured it out. So, we spent 6 months in Olympia and we worked random odd jobs. Like literally, I remember one specific night we were going to bed and I said, hey, how much money did you make today? And he's like, this much. He goes, how much money did you make today? I said, this much. He goes, cool. We have enough. Literally. And we were just hustling. And this was before side hustle was a thing. So we end up moving to University Place in March of 2008. He took a sales job. I worked at El Gaucho. I cleaned houses. He painted houses. We just did whatever it took. And then in April of 2010, we launched the church, Hope Community Church. So just a little fun tie-in. The Discover Hope and our website, discoverhope.org, is actually from the Sheldon's original vision of the church. So I have often found myself these last couple months going, Sheldon got to live out his dream through discoverhope.org, and I feel like I'm gonna get to live out mine through discoverhope.org, both of us getting to carry a message that feels authentically true to us. So we'll definitely talk more about him later, but that's a little bit about Sheldon. And then to button it up as far as our family goes, so Cash is our fourth born, and he was born in 2011. So right after the church got going, and definitely, as my friend Janie Patterson said when I found out I was pregnant, because we just had gotten rid of all of our baby stuff. We were like, we're done having kids. And then surprise. And she told me, and it's been true, she said, Sarah, trust me on this one, because they had a similar experience with having a caboose baby, as they're called. She said, it will be like your family's having a baby this time. And trust me, he's going to be the cherry on top. And he's not the favorite, although he wants to think he is. He's loved, but he definitely completes our family. So, so that's a little bit about Sheldon and kind of our origin story of how we got, to Washington and University Place. And then another thing that I wanted to tell you as part of this origin story is there were, now that I look back and in my healing process along the way, I can see where life was, I'm just going to say it the way that I say it. And even if this doesn't align with you, I don't expect it to. We all get to have our own experience of our own lives. The way I say it now is this. I don't believe or think that death was ever a part of the original design of life. So I always say it this way now. Since God can't bring Sheldon back, I have felt now that God did everything he could on the front end and has done everything he can on the back end of losing Sheldon to be as close and as near as possible, and to basically have made this terrible experience of life be as not painless, but I feel like God's been really good to me. And I feel like there were some messages on the front end that I obviously didn't know were messages, but when I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So again, like none of this is scripted. So I'm finding how this would flow because there's like two different pieces. Okay, I'll say it this way. Originally, in October of 2018, when I felt like this whole concept or whole like, oh my gosh, I can share, I can help, I can try to do my best to put out there help and hope for others so that if they were to ever find this space, they could at least have like a little path through grief that somebody else went through. Because you should see my text thread from February 24th of 2018 till now to myself. It's like, oh, that's when she was learning about this, or, oh, that's when she was into that. Because it's like, I just would send myself these different links or different things that got me through that moment. And so originally, I always called this space Rhina Korn's Hope, a place to come when the script of your life gets flipped. Oddly enough, I'm just like this in my wiring. My brain naturally put death, divorce, disappointment, diagnosis. So that's literally how I've referred to this space when I would talk to people. They say, "You going to write a book?" I'd say, "I don't know if I want to write a book." I know I couldn't read a book in the beginning. My brain was so scrambled. But I always could push play. I still to this day sleep with the earbud in. I almost became like a binky. I would put an earbud in and I'd push play on something and it would get me through the night or the moment or whatever it was. So anyway, Rhina Korn's Hope, where did that come from? This is crazy to me that I'm getting to share this with you now, knowing that I'm weird with time and dates. So we left for the cruise on February 17th of 2018. That was a Saturday. So the week and a half before that was a Wednesday. And we're having our staff meeting with our church staff. So this was really cool. Sheldon and I always tripped over each other, like in the church world, because it was his role, but kind of the nature of the beast at the time. I'm not in that role anymore, so I don't know. But it kind of required the wife or the spouse of the pastor to like play a significant role in the church, which I don't think is really fair, but more on that later, or maybe never. But nonetheless, that's how I felt and still feel, because it's like Tim is my husband now, and he's the middleman. So he sells windows, and he is the middleman between the window maker and then like builders. And nobody's calling me about Tim's job, and nobody expects me to be a part of Tim's job. So anyway, I digress. However, Sheldon and I had found this, my friend and a really important spiritual guide in my life, Ryan Meeks, when I was telling him this, he was like, "Oh, Sarah, you guys had created a really cool ecosystem." Because I ended up getting into real estate in 2013 and then ended up starting my own real estate team called Good Homes, Do All the Good You Can, in 2015. And so for 3 years prior to Sheldon's death, I had Good Homes and he had Hope. And a lot of our pastors and our staff worked with me on Monday, Wednesdays, and then they worked with Sheldon on Tuesday, Thursdays. So it's like we had created this really, I felt, amazing way to do our life together. Plus that meant that people weren't always in the church office. They were out doing life with like real people. So anyway, there we were with our staff. And because Sheldon and I had found we were really in a good groove. And someone in the staff meeting said, "Hey, so is Sarah like the assistant pastor now?" To which, I died a little inside. And thank God, Sheldon was like, "No." Mind you, he died 10 days later. He goes, "No, Sarah's never to have a label. And then he kind of looked like I'm doing now, and he goes, he goes, Sarah's never to have a label. He goes, she's kind of like a rhinocorn. She's half rhino, half unicorn. And then unbeknownst to any of us, that this was like he was leaving me with a charge and giving a charge to the team around us. He said, but you know what, guys? Never let her move more than one. Then he looks at me and kind of winks and goes, okay, 2 mountains at a time. So there it was, unbeknownst to, and then life went on. But when I looked back and I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, do you remember when he said that? He called me a rhinocorn that day. And he said, never let her move more than one. Okay, 2 mountains at a time. So I really struggled at first with not calling this Rhinocorn's Hope. But what's so cool kind of about getting to create something, and especially, at least I hope with all of my ability, I don't want to have my ego in this. Like, I'm not doing this to get something out of it. I'm literally, all I want is to be as helpful as possible, and hopefully maybe something I'll say, or maybe somebody will come on one day as we have guests come on and share their stories, and it'll just help. Because at the end of the day, that's what I think that I've realized of life. Like, there's so much support around us. There's so much wisdom within us by our own experience, that I'm not a grief expert. I'm not a life coach. I'm simply a woman who had the worst case scenario happen and be able to tell about it. So yeah, I hope that you got to know a little bit more about Sheldon today, and will fall in love with him just as I did. Along the way, as you get to know even more. And I think if I'm going to say like a closing remark, well, you know what I'll do? I'll close it like this. Sheldon and I were very intentional, and we had this mantra in our home that ultimately became the mantra of the church, and then has gone beyond that. It's gone into our community. But this is the way that Sheldon would close out hope. I might get emotional, and that's actually really good. The mantra was this: it's love, live, lead. And this is the way Sheldon closed out every service that he ever got to preach, whether it was in his own space or beyond. He would say, now, may you go, and may you love as if your life depends upon it, because it does. And may you live, and may you live fully, and may you lead just as you are, knowing that even the most introverted person will impact up to 10,000 people in their lifetime. And now I say this to you: you matter, your hurt matters, and your healing matters. And doggone it, if I have anything to do to be part of your story, you're gonna bloom again. I promise. Keep coming back. It's gonna get better. I promise it does. All right, before we go, if Discover Hope has helped you or encouraged you at all, I wanted to invite you to be a part of the bigger picture. One way you could do that would be by subscribing, liking, or sharing any of the episodes with someone you think might benefit from it, or even on your social media platforms. Another way you could do this, if you'd like to make a donation or even sponsor an episode on behalf of someone you love, you can do that by clicking the link to discoverhope.org below, or you can head on over to our website where you can make donations there, or also sponsor at discoverhope.org. You guys, thank you for being a part of this. It's a dream come true. And I truly believe that we are giving grief a language and making room for an abundant amount of hope. Thanks so much.